Hey, this is Professor Homa. Welcome to EX9, Responsive Web Design. And if this page looks a little familiar, it's from their EX5 exercise. And we're going to use this as an example to make a responsive web page. And we're going to use this dentist page. Now, I'm in Firefox right now, and the reason I'm in Firefox is because they have a tool called Responsive Design View, which makes it a little easier to look at breakpoints and to see what our web pages are going to look like on a mobile device. Now, you don't necessarily need that, but because one thing you can do in Firefox, I'm just going to grab the corner of the page, and remember we had this set up so our body was centered in the middle. It was about 960 pixels wide, and we had it so if the page got smaller, it stayed in the middle, and eventually once it got smaller than 960, it just basically gets cropped off. And that's okay, except if you're viewing it on a phone, you might be looking at it in a window maybe like this big, so that could be a problem. So what we want to do is make it responsive so that if someone views it in a phone, it'll actually view so it's easy to read. The layout might change. Instead of having a 3-column layout, we're probably going to do a 1-column layout because it's easier to just view vertically and scroll down. And we could also set it up for different layouts for iPads and for different devices. But right now we're just going to focus on for the web and for like a mobile device like a phone right now. Now let me show you where to find this in Firefox. If you go to Tools and you go to Web Developer, and there's Responsive Design View, and they have a shortcut that you could put it in there too. And if you just click on here, it basically kind of blacks out the background and it gives you some handles so that you can kind of resize the window. And again, this won't really show a lot right now, other than basically you could kind of gauge where the point is where you'd want to do a breakpoint. And when I did the sample, I kind of did a breakpoint at about 680. You can see once I get up to about 680, that's about where you start to cut off the text. So that's where we're going to do the breakpoint on it. We're not worried about the photo getting cut off, but we don't want the content to get cut off. So once it gets to about 680, we're going to change the layout a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to stack this so that the navigation is going to be on top, then the content, and then the picture is going to be third. And as an example, I'll look at this one. This is a revised one that I changed a little bit. And this one is a little more responsive. Again, it only has one breakpoint, and I'll show you where the breakpoint is. Basically, if I move this over, and once it gets to about 680, where the text is, you can see what happens. It changes, and what it actually does is it switches out some other CSS styles, and it's going to change the CSS styles so that it puts the navigation on top. And you might say, well, how does it flip things around? Well, it doesn't necessarily change the order of things, but it's going to take away the two floats here. So these still have to be in the order that this is first, this is second, this is third in our HTML. So I had to change that so that the photo part, the figure, is last in the HTML so that it stacks on top of each other. But basically we remove the floats, and it's basically going to have the navigation. You can see I changed this a little bit. I changed the hover color so it goes all the way across, so it'd be a little more noticeable if you're using your finger to kind of click on it. And then there's the content, and I'll put it in kind of a iPhone size, and that's about how it would look on an iPhone. And keep in mind, if I'm going to put this one in iPhone view. Keep in mind, this is at best. I mean, at worst, you may have it looking something like that where you have to pinch and scroll and move around, which is also a pain. So we're going to set it up so that it scales it nicely like this, and then you could kind of view it, just scroll up and down. Scrolling up and down is okay. We don't want people to scroll right and left. So we're going to set this up so that we put the navigation up here. We'll change the background hover a little bit. We'll make sure that we keep our padding on the side. We'll make sure the picture shows up last, and that's about it. Also, another thing, if you notice that once we get to 680, the picture starts to scale. The picture scales, which is nice, and it scales in proportion, so it doesn't it crops to here, but then you see the whole picture, and the whole picture starts to scale. And there's different things you could do with photos, but this one we're just going to scale it because it's not that important. We don't want it taking up so much of the page, particularly the height. We don't want it taking up vertical space, so it's okay if that gets smaller, and that's basically what's going to happen. So we're going to work with that. And let me just show you a couple things with the HTML, and I'll go back to brackets. Here's my CSS, and I'll look at my HTML in brackets, and I'll also bring up the Chrome page so my updates will show immediately. But what I actually did, if you look here in my HTML, and basically I took figure and I moved it out of section and I put figure after section. So that'll help when we we go responsive, when we put it in one column, it'll allow the picture, to be last, so that it shows up at the bottom. Because the way we did it the first time, I think it's up by the header part, or the heading tag. So it was up like underneath the name, so it might show up here. So that's why I moved that around ahead of time, and I'll give you updated HTML, so that's moved. Also, if you look at the CSS, just a couple things to show you with the CSS, and you've probably noticed this by now if you're using brackets, that if you click on the element in CSS, for example the nav left, it'll show you like a little border around it, and this nav left is actually set with a float. It's floated left. That means it floats left of whatever's after it, and whatever's after it in the HTML. And the next thing, which is the section main, and I'll click on that, you can see there's a little border around that too. The section main is the next thing, and that floats left of whatever's after that. So I don't have to put float right here. So it's float left, and you might think, well, this must be float right, and it doesn't have to be. This doesn't have any float, because this will just fill in the extra space. Now, one thing I did have to do with section main, if you take a look at it here, I did adjust the width of it, so it's cut off here in order to allow room for the picture. So for example, if the width of my section main was like 498, you can see what would happen. There wouldn't be enough room. This floats left, and the other HTML would fit in here if it could, but it can't, so it bumps it to the next line. And remember, this stuff isn't affected by the float because we cleared the float for the footer navigation and for the copyright down here. But this, since it's part of the HTML next to the floats, it would normally, these would float left of this picture, but since it can't fit. So what I had to do was just scale the width of that section a little bit down to, not 6, but down to 3, and that'll allow room for that picture to kind of fit in there. But the important thing is it's also the third thing in HTML. The nav comes first, the section comes next, and then the figure, so that when we stack it, it'll put the picture at the bottom, because I don't want the picture at the top, or it's obviously not, the dentist standing by the fireplace is not the most important thing on the page. Okay, so that's one of the things we're going to change. And while I'm looking at the CSS, I'll show you what the media query looks like. It's really not that complicated. I put a little divider here so it's easy to find with all these extra asterisks. But this is what we're going to do, this media only screen and max width 680. 680 means basically once it hits a maximum of 680, once it goes there or less, max means this number or less, it's going to switch out the styles we have, and you don't have to change all the styles, you only have to change the styles that are going to change. And if nothing's changing, you don't have to edit anything. But if they are going to change, like obviously the width of 100% is different from the width of 960, so we're going to change that. I took out the box shadow and the border. I'm not going to use that. I had to change some things with the banner at the top. I had to put in a height of auto. Margin bottom, that just fixes a little white space in there. The pick is going to change a little bit. It's going to have a max width of 100% and a height of auto. That's going to allow it to scale. So a couple things are going to change. We're going to remove the float. So if you're removing the float, you have to put float none. You can't just have it without a float. You got to put float none. So you reset it. So it tells it, because otherwise it'll default to what it originally has. So if there's a change, you have to put a change. So there's not a whole lot of things are going to change here, but there are some changes. So it is some work to do responsive, especially on this one. And what's going to help you with your work, if you read some of the articles, is actually designing for mobile first. We didn't. When we did this, we designed for desktop. I'm a designer, so I like designing in a fixed width, 960. Everything looks good, 3 columns. It's like designing a flyer. Except designing for mobile devices is a little harder. But if you design for that ahead of time, we won't have to do so much work of resetting everything we designed for kind of fixed width here, because we had to change all our pixel widths to percents, which are more relative. So eventually we won't have to do this much work, but for this one we will. We'll have to throw in a lot of extra things, and you could basically copy and paste them and just make some changes. And it's a good way to get the idea, and hopefully it'll change your workflow of the way you do responsive design. But that's a little overview of what we're going to do. Again, Firefox, check out other sites, check out as many as you can, and check out if they're responsive or not. View them, and the best way is to, if you have a phone, View websites on a phone, see what they look like. Check out the Warren site, check out the Campus Racket one for the WCCC Campus Racket. Check out other schools, check out everything. You'll see there's a lot of responsive sites out there to look at now. So, and that's kind of what, what people want to see, because a lot of people are looking at things on phones. You'll see a lot of stats of people viewing websites on phones. So you want to have content first. You want to be able to, if you're going to the dentist, you want to come here and be able to find everything that you want. Now, some things eventually will change this. We'd want to have this navigation, have it so you can maybe click and this will disappear, so it's not taking so much vertical space. But that'll take a little time. We'll start doing this first, and then we'll kind of move on to some other things.